In this video, we're going to set up a document in Illustrator that could be used to create something for an actual print item like a business card. So there's a couple of important points that have to be made when it comes to setting something up for print specifically, and I'm going to go over those in some light detail. So just starting from the home page isn't really the right word for it, but that's what I'm going to say. Go to New Document, creating something new. It's going to open the wizard for creating a new document. And we've already covered this in an early video as far as what all of these things deal with specifically. So I'm not going to go into detail there. Instead, I'm going to just go ahead and start setting this up. I'm going to choose the inches as the denomination that I'm using, and I'm going to set the width of those to 3.5 inches, and I'm going to set the height to 2 inches, which is your standard dimensions for a business card. I'm also going to ensure that the artboards are set at 2 because I need a front and a back. Another thing that I will need is a bleed, which is the excess of the design that's trimmed off during the process of printing. The reason why you need that excess is so that you don't have paper trimmed at exact size, which is an imperfect process, and you end up with like a white line along the edge of your design where some of the color that you used didn't quite cover because it just isn't a perfectly precise process. So we have a little bit of extra that's printed and then trimmed off. So we're going to use 1/8 of an inch, which is 0.125 inches. We are going to keep the color mode on CMYK because 4-color process is still the most dominant one for print items. So I'm going to create this, and it's going to open up a new canvas that has these 2 different artboards which represent the front and the back. And you may ask yourself, well, which one's the front and which one's the back? The answer is it doesn't matter. I actually get that question a lot, and I find it rather amusing. It really doesn't matter. Now, it can get a little bit more complicated if you make interesting changes to how the canvases are laid out. So just as an example, if I go down here to the artboard tool and I select that, I can select either one of these and change the orientation by using the portrait and landscape buttons up here. So maybe I want one side of it to be landscape and I want the other side to be portrait. That can be kind of interesting. I would say you should pay a little bit of attention to when you turn the card over, how is the text oriented to the viewer, but not greatly concerned by it with something like a business card. You wouldn't want it to be upside down, but that's actually kind of difficult to do, is to accidentally make text upside down on one side or the other. Now with the bleed, which you see as this red line around the edge, just as a brief explanation, the white canvas is what my final trim would be. The bleed, that excess that's going to be printed and then trimmed off, is represented by the gray area between the white border and the red line. So what I would do if I was designing this to be printed, and let's say I wanted half of one side to have a colored background. So I'm just going to put green on here, and I'm using the wrong shape tool, so I'm going to select the correct one with the rectangle tool. This would be the correct way to put that background on, filling out that area all the way up to the bleed. Now again, the final trim size, what they give you after the printing process is completed, will not show anything that's outside the white canvas, but you have to have that extra so that when it's printed, you don't end up with a little sliver, which would probably look something like this, of white along the edge because the printing process is not perfect. So make sure that that's filled out all the way. Really common thing for students to do is to create the bleed lines properly, but then put a background on like this, forgetting that the bleed needs to be addressed. So anything that runs off the edge of the design should be filled out all the way to the bleed line, that extra 1/8 of an inch. Now, when you're putting text and such on here, you want to make sure that none of that gets even close to the edge. You should maintain about another 1/8 of an inch where text does not get close to the edge. That's active content. It's not background elements. It's not something that runs off the edge. Instead, it is active content within the design. It should not go near the edge. Should not be down here like this because, again, printing process is imperfect. You might think it's really edgy. That's a bit of a pun. You might think it's really edgy to put your text down there, but it's not going to look great because it's probably going to be trimmed incorrectly. You just can't get it that precise. So make sure that you've got about 1/8 of an inch between whatever your content is and the edge of your final design. Definitely no text is going to go out to the bleed line. Last thing to mention is make sure that you're thinking about your design in terms of the size it would actually be in the real world. So, just as an example, if I think about what 2.5 inches would be, looking at it here on my computer, if you're watching this video in a frame, it might look a little bit different in terms of size, but this is about the size that a business card would be if I was actually holding it. So I can't go in here and work really closely and assume that text is going to be legible because I can see it when I'm zoomed in 600%. Instead, I need to think about this in terms of what size it would actually be. Otherwise, you create a lot of problems for yourself. When you're working in inches, you can at least go back to the default idea of points, knowing that anything below 10 point is typically pretty difficult to read. So magazine text, etc., is typically done at 10 point. 12 point starts to get a little bit big. So I usually stick to 10 point unless I'm trying to really get somebody's attention with something. If it's just informational text, I hover around that 10 point area.